I think the point about inclusion is really important. As you know, I used to work in like a university context, and a colleague of mine always used to talk about how, because there is a focus in universities, as there is in lots of sectors, but you think about around A-level day, there's always how many kids from private school backgrounds get into Oxbridge, how many kids from different, whether that's kind of ethnic minority backgrounds or, whatever it might be, how many sort of, again, looking at that kind of demographic, the equivalent of that demographic data. And a colleague of mine always used to say, but it's not just about getting in, it's about getting on, which I thought was a really kind of a great way of phrasing it. Like once your foot is in the door, what is your experience like? That's about culture. That's about the kind of organisation that you want to be. And I think we're really lucky at Global Action Plan, because I think we have got a supportive, as you say, the staff survey backs it up. We've got the support of leadership. We know that staff are kind of on board with this, but we know that that's not the case universally across the year. I think we're lucky as an organisation to have that. But I think where you see kind of organisations where this kind of action is struggling to really get traction, and the people who are championing the work are really struggling to be heard, I think it's almost because there is this resistance to culture change, but sadly not the recognition that culture change is actually positive for everyone in the long run.
Yeah, and I guess it's that we are lucky at Gap that we have a very good and a very strong organisation culture already, so there isn't any, I don't feel like there's any sense of distrust or anything like that when we're talking about change. And I think people are very confident that we're not trying to do things in a tokenistic way, and we're putting real thought and meaning into it. And I guess that's like a strength and weakness for us at Gap, in the sense that when you think about culture from a diversity perspective and who holds the power, who has the voice or the confidence to voice an opinion, at Gap we pride ourselves on kind of not being very hierarchical. And in some ways you can think, well, that makes it easier for diverse voices to be heard. But, we have to critique that and not just believe that to be the case. We actually have to talk to our staff and find out if that is the reality, because I'd imagine that it presents just as many difficulties. If you don't have that hierarchy, sometimes it can be even more complicated who gets to speak up and who doesn't. So I think, again, that's one of the sort of challenges we'll have to look at as we're planning our actions over the next coming months.
I'm really glad you used the word power, or that you raised it, because that's fundamentally what this work is about, right? It's about critiquing power structures, understanding where power sits and the historical reasons for that. And that's within your organisation, but also just more broadly. And how your organisation responds to that, and where it fits, and whether that's appropriate. And I think it is hard, because I think I think hierarchy can get a bad name, and that's not to say that I don't want to come out here as like a fan of like overly bureaucratic hierarchical systems, because I wouldn't say that I am. But I think, and this is where perhaps I'm blurring some terms, and that's not fair. But people need decision makers, right? You need responsibility and you need accountability. You need people who are kind of, you need leaders who have vision, want to take decisions, and are committed to kind of seeing them through. That's actually what everyone needs. And I think having that kind of vision and leadership, I think sometimes can get confused, not in our organisation, but can get confused with the idea of hierarchy. But I'm just reflecting on kind of on I think that sort of the idea, as you said, that not having hierarchy can be just as much of a challenge to get things done.
And it's the same with this whole thing about the, our kind of thing at the moment that we're focusing on is putting the processes and systems in place, because we've got the attitudes there, the values are there around diversity, but let's get the systems and processes in place. Well, the same thing applies, because Gap tends to be, we don't want to be super policy driven. We don't want to be really prescribing to people exactly what they need to do and when. So it's getting that balance right of saying we need to have clear enough guidance in place that people know what's available to them and the opportunities are all applied fairly, but not putting things in place that restrict the kind of freedoms and flexibilities that are part of our values in terms of how we work and how we make sure that we're agile to change and things like that. So I think it is about making sure that we don't just pick a sort of diversity program off the shelf and just say, plonk it into Gap and hope it fits. We really need to work on making sure that it is bespoke and fit for purpose, and it suits us. And that is going back to our values. We want to challenge the norm. We don't just want to follow a path that's carved out in diversity or follow along with the systems that we know aren't working for everyone in the kind of communities we operate in. So let's challenge the norm. Let's question what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done, and try and kind of improve along that way.
Yeah, I think it's meaningful change, isn't it? That's what we're, as you say, that's what we aim to deliver anyway. So why wouldn't we do that through this aspect of our work?